Would a great innovator give up so easily on that promised future?
I won't. I'll find a way to save us all.
Welcome to End of Dragons Daily. So you guys might be surprised to hear that my favorite thing from the sneak peek at End of Dragons stream is actually something they didn't emphasize very much at all. I mean, think for yourself. What was it? Was it fishing? Was it skiffs? Was it the legendary announcement, which in my previous part I actually gave some reasons why I think might be pretty good? For me, it was actually strike missions. Something they didn't emphasize whatsoever, but I really do believe is going to be very big for the game. So in today's End of Dragons Daily, I'm going to basically talk a ton of crap about raids and how the pursuit of raids has kind of ruined the past 3-4 years of this game's reputation and development, and why this little announcement on the sneak peek could be the greatest news of all. I mean, really exciting. So here, I'll put it on screen, play it for you guys, and then we'll see what we think.
Hi, I am Cameron Rich. I'm a senior game designer here at ArenaNet, and I act as the lead for the Encounters team. For End of Dragons Strike missions, we're taking some epic encounters from the story of End of Dragons, and we're creating really awesome, challenging 10-man versions of those encounters for you to enjoy. For End of Dragons Strike missions, we're doing something new in that we're adding challenge mode difficulty to each strike mission to release with End of Dragons. These challenge modes will be enabled shortly after launch, and they are designed to give our hardcore players, our existing raiders, something to really sink their teeth into. In addition to the challenge modes, we're also going to be revamping our reward system for strike missions to simplify and standardize them across the game. I am really excited for fans to get their hands on the strike missions for End of Dragons because there's a lot of surprises that we've been able to put into the design. Lots of opportunity to work together with your friends to overcome some really epic bosses.
Okay, so what do we hear there? Challenging content, take it on with your friends. What are they talking about? Well, really, and it's weird to me that they missed this phrase. They're talking about putting hardcore, real endgame into the MMO. Something that Guild Wars 2 currently really doesn't cater to people with very well at all, and has a really bad reputation for. Such a bad reputation, in fact, that I think a lot of people think Guild Wars 2 is destined and meant to be a casual game, which I've got to say I think is complete rubbish and untrue. I really wish, in fact, that on this announcement stream, they talked more about that, about their ambition to not just be a casual game, because it really is in this franchise's DNA to have real good PvE combat at the end game. If End of Dragons is kind of the start of a new era for Guild Wars 2 with new leadership and new ideas, you know, this should be at the forefront. And I think that there's a lot of jilted, lost, estranged players out there right now who just never believe Guild Wars 2 will have great, satisfying end game. They're going to other games like World of Warcraft and to like Final Fantasy 14, and that sucks. And I don't just say that as someone who wants this stuff to exist. I say it as someone who has actually followed the studio for a living for a decade, who's played as a fan for even longer. I mean, what, since Factions came out originally 14 years ago? And they used to do this stuff. They did hardcore PvE when the game first came out, with the Fissure of Woe, with the Underworld. When Cantha came out, they did the Elite missions. When Nightfall came out, they did Domain of Anguish. They did Frostmoors, Burrows, and the Duncan the Black encounter in Eye of the North, and so on. They wanted it in Guild Wars 2. Interviews about dungeons show that that's what dungeons were meant to be. And fractals were meant to be it. And since Heart of Thorns, raids were meant to be it. The thing is that they've just constantly dropped the ball and they've messed up. I'm not saying that Guild Wars 2 in particular has done well with this side of the MMO space, because I don't think they have. Like, I think if I was to give one shining example of ArenaNet ineptitude, it's on this specific major facet of MMO development. It's not that they don't want to satisfy these communities or have them in their game. It's that they've failed to do it well for years and years and years. So before I get into my discussion why I think strikes are so good, let's look at the reality we're in. Since raids were introduced with Heart of Thorns in 2015, 6 years ago, 7 years once End of Dragons out nearly, since then, they've done 7 wings. That's it, 7. But really, if you look at those 7 wings, only 4 of the 7, that would be the first 3 and then the Underworld, only those 4 were unflinchingly balanced for like a hardcore community. All the others were balanced around a much lower bar, a deliberately lower bar, to try and grab at a larger audience, because the raiding community in Guild Wars 2 is very small, and so when they made these wings, they wanted it to appeal to more people, make it seem like it's more possible. And that was a big mistake, in my opinion, and one of many mistakes, because what that meant is that these wings failed to satisfy the people who wanted a challenge, a community who'd already been waiting long stretches of time, like 9 months or more upwards, with no assurance that new wings would be coming in, only to then just like one-shot some of the encounters and move on, to the point that they then quit, solidifying Guild Wars 2's status outside of MMOs as just an easy game. And it didn't even really convince people who weren't raiding to get in on it big time, because they didn't trust that when they're being told it's easier or it's balanced to be more comfortable, that they really had an opportunity to get in. They weren't confident about their gear, they weren't confident about their builds, they weren't sure where to get a group, because this game doesn't have a sophisticated or robust LFG tool. These are the things that Guild Wars 2 actually needed to work on to improve its infrastructure and grow the raiding scene. So it's just shrunk even more, and we've seen through the entire Icebrood Saga era, they didn't do it at all. So let's be clear, I think in an ideal world, raids, Guild Wars 2's version of raids, are amazing. Truly the best PvE has ever been in this game. My best experiences of PvE are by and large within those raid wings that they've released. In terms of spectacle and environment and looter narrative and all the rest, they are fantastic. The difficulty tuning is nearly always what has tripped them up and has never really been an adequate or appropriate bar. If ArenaNet had calibrated, especially those most recent 3 wings, I would say, better, they would still have the reputation as being some of the best in the genre, just that they come out too slowly and really other games are more efficient at getting them in at a good cadence. But we don't live in that ideal world. We live in the world where the studio prioritizes open world maps over raids, and masteries over raids, and story instances over raids, and meta events over raids instead. We live in a world where half the studio seems to be making mobile games, or pitches for the June IP, or whatever else is going on. Since raids came out in Heart of Thorns, there hasn't been a permanent fixture of like a raiding team. Raiding teams are quietly shuffled away in the background to work on other stuff. We haven't had that expectation of new ones coming since what? The first 3, I think we knew there were going to be 3 coming out in what, 2015? Ever since then, it's just been, are we lucky enough to get a raid? Who knows? Maybe today they'll announcement, maybe they won't for another 6 months. So we're in a chicken and an egg situation as far as raids are currently, where there's basically no sizable community. What exists is pathetically small, very easy to ignore, and so they don't make the content for that tiny community, so the community shrinks further and we spiral downwards. Sometimes you'll get something like the big legendary update we had, and legendary armor is PvE legendary armor that is tied to raids, so you get a bit of an infusion of new players. But raids for raids' own sake haven't been able to spiral upwards, they've only ever spiraled down. They've been bad. So then we ask ourselves, well, why can't they prioritize raids over that other stuff I just mentioned, which does have bigger communities? And I would say it's this, because Guild Wars 2 raids, what we think about as a raid right now, they aim way too high. There is an incredibly high bar of quality that they set for themselves. I think you see that they actually reined back on it a bit with the most recent wing, the Hidden City of Adashim, but still, it's a very, very high bar, and even when they hit that bar, raids themselves fundamentally are offering quality and experiences to people who don't appreciate them. So what do I mean? Well, people who raid and do this challenging, difficult content, as they mentioned in that little clip about the strike missions a second ago. They do it because they want to participate in fun combat that pushes back, that takes a while to figure out and to clear, because they want long-term objectives and skill and knowledge-based progression and prestige. They want it hard, and they care about the combat. Yet what do ArenaNet do with raids? They fill them with story. And with voice acting that the raiders aren't generally interested in. Most people would rather skip that stuff, especially on their second time through. ArenaNet build these ridiculously, amazingly crafted, beautiful environments, full maps. Like, look at the Mystic Forge raid and just how gorgeous that place is, that the raiders mostly ignore, because what they're interested in are the boss attacks and the telegraphs and the way that the actual arena fights work. Sure, there are some of us that appreciate the full spectrum of what's going on and can actually get in there and enjoy it, but it's a very tiny fraction of the player base. And these really exciting story beats and environments, they really offer no value on replay. Even me, who loved how everything came together with, say, the Bastion of the Penitent raid, I actually put it as one of my favorite all-time patches and moments for Guild Wars 2. Am I really valuing or appreciating all of that on my third go through? Well, no, not really. They don't give repeat value, and raids are fundamentally a repeatable section of the endgame. So not only is that all basically wasted dev time, because the audience you're aiming at isn't going to appreciate it, if not right away, then eventually, but you're also ticking off people on the reverse side. Every time I mention the Bastion of the Penitent, I get people in my YouTube comments or my Twitch comments or on my Twitter saying, oh, this really sucks, I wanted to play that, I wanted to see the Soul story, I'm a Guild Wars 1 player, I deserve to have access to that, but I can't because it's locked behind raids and I refuse to do raids. So you antagonize one half of the community while offering something to another half that don't care. This is one of the fundamental reasons I think Guild Wars 2 and how it does raids is bad. One solution I think is easy to think of that kind of solves this is to say, oh, just add difficulty modes and then it'll be fine. Let the easy people play the easy bit and then everyone's happy. And the studio has kind of already stepped into that idea of having difficulty modes with CMs, and especially now that the new repeatable CM infrastructure's in there. You kind of, it's a matter of perspective, right? The CM you could call the normal mode and the non-CM is the easy mode. Obviously, when people are asking for difficulty modes, they're asking for a super easy mode. They're asking for the bar to be lowered so that they can get in there and play. But if you think about it, it's not really a great solution, because all the people who are asking for that super low bar mode with presumably stripped out cosmetic rewards and so on, they'd be doing it to experience the beautiful environments, the story beats, the bits that they only need to experience once, the bits that don't matter as far as repeatability is concerned. They'd miss out on the deeper value of the full encounters and composition and buildcraft, so they'd just spam through it and then they'd call it done. So what have you done? You've created a bunch of extra developmental overhead on something that's already too bloated to juggle multiple modes for a game type you can barely support in the first place, to create a glorified living world story instance, basically, which we all lament aren't really that great. It's a bunch of work for a potentially lateral move. Not good. Sure, other MMOs do difficulty modes to great effect, and in games with teams that can properly support that stuff, the ideal world, I don't deny, I think there probably is value there. The main idea is that these people who experience easy mode at least get a taste, and then they might transition and stick around for the full experience. But remember, that process cuts both ways. People who currently do put in the effort to play, say, Bastion of the Penitent in the full difficult version, to experience the story because they have no choice, now have a chance of just rushing through in the easy mode and leaving again because they do have the choice. So, I'm not saying I have all the answers, but for the world we live in, the way that raids are structured and developed by ArenaNet, it's not good, and there isn't an easy answer. Clearly there's not, or I think over the past half decade, you would have seen the minds of the hundreds of developers at ArenaNet find a way to actually implement that stuff, and they haven't. So, what do other games do then? Well, here I think you can actually see some formats that work. What does Destiny do with its story bosses? What does Final Fantasy XIV do with its simple circular arena bossing experiences to great success? What have they proved works? Well, they do, by and large, what the Icebrood Saga called strike missions. So in the Icebrood Saga, ArenaNet tentatively tried this new concept, strikes. It's all about the fight. There's no bells, there's no whistles there. They are often reusing bosses that you've actually experienced out there in the main storyline, which is what they've mentioned they're now doing with End of Dragons. They're much more efficient to add because they don't have all this extra fluff. Where a single raid might take the majority of a year for a team to create, with just 3 actual fights, maybe one of them's really easy, a couple of CMs. If you do strikes that cut away all of the fat, you might end up with like 5 or more strike missions. Strike missions that come in separately, so they can release at more incremental but more regular releases. Literally more content more regularly for the same price of development. And where Guild Wars 2 raids are clumsily bundling all the environments and stories and stuff, strikes don't. So you can appropriately do difficulty tiers, and there's no risk that someone's using them as a simple bypass, because what are they bypassing? I mean, you're there for the fight. It all works much more cleanly. I'm a really big believer in strikes. I think if the devs had turned their back on raids during the Path of Fire era and been doing this instead, not only would we still have a decent hardcore community of raiders, raiders in this game, we wouldn't have a negative reputation as being too easy outside of the game. And in fact, I think the community would have grown. So here's the thing, I don't see many people, you know, shouting from the rooftops how exciting this announcement was from the stream. And the reason for that is because strikes, as they currently exist in Guild Wars 2, have kind of a bad reputation. They have a bad reputation because of how they were utilized in the Icebrood Saga. ArenaNet were way too timid with them. They were far too easy. There was kind of this idea that strikes are meant to just transition you into raids, rather than strikes being the thing themselves. You'll notice in this announcement they never mention new raids are coming. If you fully focus on strikes as being the place where the hard stuff is meant to be, well, now you can make them much more interesting. The current strikes in the Icebrood Saga, there's like 2 of them that maybe kick back a bit. The Whisper of Jormag and the Bone Skinner, but even then, they're nowhere near where they should be. And the studio was scared to put the strikes in the main story, or even make it clear that they were being added. You know, I'll bet that people played through a lot of the Icebrood Saga patches and didn't even find the strike portals, don't even realize that that's going on at the Eye of the North. End of Dragons can correct that too, by making it so that the strikes are literally replaying specific story instances, which they confirmed here on the stream. That was music to my ears. Hopefully they're not easy to miss in the expansion. What I would have loved to have heard on this stream, and hopefully they have some kind of blog post about strikes and End of Dragons in the coming months, is for them to compare strike difficulty as like Doom CM difficulty. I would say Doom CM is probably the longest, most challenging progression phase anyone's experienced in Guild Wars 2 raiding so far. And if they actually have the confidence to come out and say, look, End of Dragons will have strikes that are calibrated around that level, immediately people will sit up and they'll pay attention. Because they didn't say that yet, I think a lot of people are still kind of hand-waving and dismissing them and think strike missions can't be great. But the difficulty of strike missions has nothing to do with what the concept itself actually contains and how they do solve all of these problems with raids. Another great thing we hear in that quote there is how they're looking to standardize and figure out the rewards. They did massively overcomplicated stuff with like cape shards and the chest that you can only open once a week and it builds up and all that. You know, if they do away with that, if they integrate the old strikes into the new system as well, if they actually tie, say, these new strike rewards into the new legendary acquisition processes, like how at launch you had to do dungeons to get legendary weapons, and believe it or not, dungeons weren't meant to be a casual feature. They were meant to be a hardcore difficult thing that like only dedicated guild groups would be able to get through. If they do that with strikes and they have the confidence, I think you'll see people, you know, really run through it right now. As I mentioned earlier in the video, now that a lot more people are interested in legendary armor, a lot more people are doing raids just because the rewards are there. And I think that they could look into that with End of Dragons going forwards as well. And we even hear a little bit of that too. And finally, I like hearing that they're going with strikes just because they're sticking with an initiative. You know, Guild Wars has another reputation of trying to reinvent the wheel, come up with an idea that's just shy of being good, and then they abandon it completely. Well, here, strikes came out through the Icebrood Saga. We're just shy of being good. They're not abandoning it completely. They're saying, no, there's actually something beautiful here. We're gonna go with it. We're gonna have a little bit of confidence. And again, that is music to my ears. Exactly what I want to see, going against that negative reputation that they just keep dropping stuff. So, I think raids are pretty bad, but strikes could finally be a place where we see a whole side, a really important side of MMOs being properly catered to. And that idea of tying it to old story, I mean, think about this, guys. Think about the Zaitan battle as a 10-man strike mission, along with some like epic CM people can go for. You know, maybe End of Dragons will come out, they'll do strikes and strike CMs for all the new story bosses and stuff that's gone on in the expansion itself, and then they can go back to look at those older encounters like with Zaitan. Think about any world boss that maybe has got cool fundamentals but isn't just tuned well. That could become a strike. Think about any Canthan meta event that they might add. Think about all those cool underutilized forged enemies that were introduced in Path of Fire, or HOT has various equivalents as well. There's so much value they can get here because they don't have to build all these new creatures, because they don't have to work on animation budget and design entire new maps. They can just focus on what's important, the content. And, you know, easy mode is baked into this idea as well, by the way. Easy mode is what you did during the story. It's tuned for one player on a wide number of builds and amounts of stats and gear opportunities. And then the strike itself is a bit harder, and CM hopefully takes, you know, days or even weeks to prog through, and we can start to get a better reputation among other MMOs and stop losing people to those other MMOs, FF14 and World of Warcraft in particular. So I'm very excited about this. It could put Guild Wars back to where it was in Guild Wars 1, where it had a respectable endgame, and I genuinely do think that's my most favorite part of the announcement. So I hope you guys enjoyed a little bit of discussion here. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. In the coming weeks, I'll continue to give you guys information about what they reveal with strikes. This concept art you can see on screen, I will have used it a couple of times in the video. This is one of the new bosses that they've shown on the official website. We don't really know what's going on there. But as they do talk more about it, and if any point, anything they say is aligned with what I'm saying here, I definitely will be screaming it from the rooftops in the videos. So thank you guys. Give me some of your takes, your ideas, and I want any number of perspectives. If you're a super casual player that hates the idea of all of it, if you are a lost, estranged player that's now just playing FF14 or something, let me hear if you think that strikes will be the way forward, and I will see you on the next one very soon. Well, we'll be talking about fishing. And is that really a great feature for End of Dragons? Well, maybe I'm not so positive on that one. See you guys very soon.